Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our joint presentation of the CRI Family of Companies on pre-sale considerations. If you aren't familiar with the CRI Family of Companies, it's made up of CRI CPAs and our 8 portfolio companies. Those companies provide services ranging from financial advisory, trust services, payroll, IT audit, data, TPA services for when you want to start or transition a 401k plan, CRI capital advisors who can market and sell your business, and even a company that can do analysis around the profitability of your company. So just a few notes as we get started. We have some polling questions popping up as we move forward. We would love to know a little bit about our attendees, so please take the time to answer those if you don't mind. Also, you can ask questions in the Q&A box. We're not able to answer those live, but one of the presenters will follow up with you to answer those questions. Today, we have an experienced panel with decades of knowledge in exit planning to help you learn what you need to do now to set yourself up for success in the future. So welcome to everyone on the panel. The first thing we'd like to do is have each one of you introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your experience in exit planning and how you can help our attendees.
Great. My name is Paul Evans. I'm with CRI Capital Advisors. I'm usually on the front end of a deal when an owner is thinking about selling their company and they've got a lot of questions and looking at value. What possibly could they bring to bear at market, and what might they expect when it comes to offers? So a market assessment, which we'll be talking about today, is a big part of my role. I've also been a business owner in 10 businesses. And so my background is as an entrepreneur. So I know where you're coming from. I know the challenges that you face, not only in running a business, but in making that decision to sell a business. Mark Berry.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mark Berry. I'm with CRI CPAs. I'm part of the Transaction Advisory Services Group, where we focus on helping business owners and institutional investors prepare for deals and then also execute on deals. I've been performing financial buy-side and sell-side diligence for just over 17 years. So we have quite a few transactions under our belt. Like Paul, I've also been part of acquiring and exiting 2 businesses over the last 5 years, with hopefully more to come. Joel?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joel Sykes. I'm the partner in charge with CRI Capital Advisors. And Paul and I are on the same team, and I've been doing M&A work for about 15 years. And prior to that, I come from an entrepreneurial background and also a CFO business consulting background as well. So I've been on both sides of transactions. And Paul and I work together with our team to try to deliver maximum results when it comes time for a business owner to consider and ultimately execute the sale of their business. So I have general oversight of the practice unit as well as serving as lead advisor on some of the transactions along with other team members in our practice unit. Larry?
Yes, I'm Larry May. I am a CPA that my primary focus is in the assurance area, but also am involved in tax and consulting. I've got about 30 years experience in closely held businesses, primarily in the construction industry. And in that time, I've assisted clients who have sold businesses to competitors, who have transitioned from one generation to the next generation through various means, including old company, new company, have transitioned into an ESOP-owned business, and those that have sold to publicly traded companies. So have been working in this area for quite a while.
Thanks, Larry. And my name is Christine Thompson. I'm the Director of Portfolio Growth here at CRI, and I will be your host today and going to be asking some questions from this great group of experts. So Larry, let's start out with you. Can you tell us how far out should you start planning when you're thinking about selling or transitioning your business?
Well, Christine, you really can't start soon enough because there are things that you're going to do on the front end in your setup that could become very important later on. And with that, I think of clients of mine who have had their family name incorporated in the name of the business. And as they think about selling, it becomes, it sometimes limits them because they're afraid that people who would take it next may not have the same standards their family did and may sully their family name in some way. Also, most people, when they're starting the business, it's a big risk and it's one of their biggest assets. And planning ahead, you should have a succession planning from the time you begin of, okay, if something happens to me, if I drive out of the, parking lot today and I'm killed in a car wreck, who's going to pick up and run my business so that my family or my heirs, whomever they may be, get the value out of that business. And also that should be something that is a very dynamic document that is constantly changing. As you get older, if you have family that are going to be your next generation to take over, you need to plan for them and how that's going to happen. And the more time you have, the better this will work. If you don't have family, you need to start identifying the key employees that can take over and take your business over so that you have a retirement plan and you can cash out and get the value that's built up in businesses. It's really sad when I see companies that have been in families for a long time and they've built up a lot of money and they simply have to liquidate, which is going to be your lowest value you ever get because they didn't think about the things soon enough. And in the current environment where you have a lot of private equity groups around and other things, identifying if that is going to be your objective is to be sold outside of your family or your key employees, then doing things and starting early to take steps that will bring the most value to your business. And a lot of those will be discussed today, but things such as, putting in place a management team that can run the business without you, diversifying your client base, having annuity business, all those things, which are very, very important, and they just take time to build. So oftentimes the biggest thing that I see is people, they think, oh, I want to retire in a couple of years. I need to start thinking about this. It's kind of like writing your will. Nobody really likes to think about it, but you need to think about it. And, 10 years, 5 years at the minimum, I would think would be the time frame that you need to plan for. Hopefully longer.
Great. Thanks, Larry. My next question is for Paul and Joel. Can you explain the difference in business valuation versus a market assessment?
Yeah, thank you, Christine. I'll take the first shot at that. Paul, you can certainly embellish anything that I don't cover adequately, but it's a great question, one we're asked pretty often. And the firm provides both services. So a business valuation is a very technical, very formal process in which a credentialed valuation professional performs a standard set of procedures to arrive at the value of a company. Usually that's a certified valuation analyst or a certified business appraiser, one of those key designations of which the firm has many. And it is a standard set of procedures that a court could rely on. The IRS can rely on those procedures. An arbitrator or someone in the mediation process can look at a business valuation and assess, okay, the valuation professional followed the right procedures. They went right down the line, standard format. Here's what the company is worth in the context of this technical valuation. This tool is most valuable in cases like a tax situation. If you're giving shares to a family member and there's an estate planning element or potential tax implications, you want to know technically what the business is worth. You don't want to create unnecessary tax ramifications that you don't have to. You can't just arbitrarily assign value to the company and assign it, really, really low, trying to avoid taxes. It's got to hold up under scrutiny. And that's where this really technical business valuation process comes into play. Also, heaven forbid, partnership disputes or marital disputes, you may have to have a very formal, very technical valuation performed to assess the value of the company to see how value gets split between parties that may be in a disagreement. Now, what my group, what Paul and I can help do is a market assessment. And that's really focused on what the company is likely to sell for. And, we often say a technical valuation is intended to hold up in court. Ours is a really reliable opinion of what your company is going to sell for. But it's going to be hard to put it in front of a judge and have him or her say, oh, yeah, this is totally acceptable. We'll just take this number on its face. Because what we do is a lot of science, but there's also a little art involved as well. And we'll do some of the same procedures like looking at comparable transactions, seeing what current deals have been done and what multiples they have traded at. But we'll go a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit off the path of the certified valuation professional. We can actually call the groups that have made purchases of similar companies, and it's called market sounding. And we take all of that feedback with a grain of salt. We know the buyers are in the business of buying businesses as inexpensively as possible. But we can call the groups that are active in an industry and say, hey, here's a company, here's some general attributes. What do you think the multiple would be? We know it's probably going to be slightly low, but if I think the multiple of a business should be 6 times EBITDA, and a company that just made a purchase in that space says, yeah, we'd probably be around 5. Well, that kind of validates my 6, right? I know they're being conservative. So like I said, we always kind of take that with a grain of salt. So we go down several different avenues to really focus on what are you likely to hear when you go to market versus this valuation has to stand up under legal scrutiny or IRS scrutiny. Paul, would you have anything to add to that?
Not much, really. I love the phrase that it's what you're most likely going to hear. People often want to know exactly what their company is worth. Obviously, it's whatever the market bears. And there's a big difference when you've got one buyer at the table and if you've got 5 buyers at the table. I will say that we tend to operate very accurately. About 90% plus of our market assessments are right in line when they hear the number, when they hear the offer. So if you come to us and you're like, I want to find out what my company's worth, we're going to be highly accurate. We're also not going to inflate it just to make it sound good. So regardless of who you work with, make sure that that level of accuracy is there.
Thanks, Paul. And my next question is for you as well. Most business owners know of different routes they can take when they're looking for an exit from their business, but as someone who's been part of hundreds of transactions, would you walk us through what those options are?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to sell your company. And often when people think about exiting, they're thinking about 100% exit. However, you may have another 5-10 years to go. Don't really want to risk your capital, but you've got an aggressive growth target in mind, and you would love to have a partner with that availability of funds, but you know that your leadership is a key to growth. So that may be a great fit for private equity. If you are feeling like I'd love to be in this long term, or I want to protect the name of our family and I'd love for it to be around for decades. It may be that a family office is a great alignment for you because they tend to not only invest in the company, you're able to pull out a lot of your own equity, but there's a longevity play that's there. Most people are very familiar with a strategic, and that's some of the large companies that are already in that particular industry that may be gobbling up all of these different companies at once, and they're looking at the synergies and the possibilities. And years ago, it seemed like that those companies would come in and just wipe out all of the employees and start over. We're not seeing that as much today. We're certainly not seeing that in private equity. And to what Larry spoke about earlier, having a strong management team can make not only a big difference in the attractiveness, it can make a difference in the multiple as well. And then you've got the transition to the next generation. If you have somebody in your family that you would like the company to go to, that's a certain segment of details and steps to be able to perform that. And then finally, the ESOP, which has been mentioned earlier as well. If possibly it's your management team that could be a great fit for that. But not every company is a great fit for an ESOP. So we certainly need to be able to spend the time and sit down and really think about those things. I'm going to hand this back to Joel for just a second to see if there's any other elements we might want to dive into a little bit deeper.
I would just add that you think about the outcome that you want, and think about, maybe we can dispel some myths today. I've been doing this long enough, in spite of my youthful appearance. I've been doing this long enough to remember when things were different, when strategic acquirers just hands down were going to be the highest valuation in the market. That used to be just kind of an adage. Well, if you want to sell for the most money, you're going to sell to a strategic. Well, private equity has really arisen over the last, especially 5 years, but even going back about 10 years, we really started to see private equity come on really, really strong. And that is not always the case. In fact, most of the time we see private equity and to a certain extent family office acquirers absolutely competitive on valuation with strategic acquirers. Maybe another myth is that, private equity groups are sort of the East Coast or West Coast sharks. They come in and they're heavy handed and they lay down the law. And really what we see most of the time is that private equity acquirers are interested in retaining your employees. They're interested in retaining and elevating the existing management team. They don't want to spoil the magic that you've created with your company. They are desperate to preserve that. Now they have an awful lot of money that they can invest in your company. What their involvement is really going to be, how do we enhance what you've been doing? How do we propel you forward? Not how do we come in and reinvent this awesome wheel that you've already created? So those are just a couple of things that I would add.
That's super helpful, Joel. I appreciate that. Mark, since you handled quality of earnings work for CRI, can you tell us some of the keys to maximizing a business's value? And then Paul, maybe you can give us your opinion from the investment banking side.
Sure, Christine, thanks. I'm just going to touch on probably 3 different points. The first one, Larry mentioned it, Joel and Paul have mentioned it, but time. Give yourself as much time as possible to be able to gather and put in place kind of the next couple things that I'm going to talk about. But time is key to help maximize value and also to keep the value at a higher level. From our standpoint, from diligence, just good financial data is always a good thing to have. And whether it be maybe it's profitability by customer, sales by customer, maybe it's volume analysis if you're selling and manufacturing widgets, strong KPIs, not just for your business, but what are the KPIs in your industry specifically? And if you're not tracking those, learn what those are and then see how your business is comparing to your industry. Because when Joel and Paul start working with somebody to take them to market, those are key pieces of data that's going to help drive value in your business. The last piece, being a CPA, dealing with financial statements, a strong monthly financial close is always key. When we start doing diligence, you might end on a December, but by the time you actually get going to market or you're going through the actual closing process of selling the business, it might be April, May, June, and those financials need to be reported timely and accurately. So a good, strong monthly close process is something that's always vital to get into the business, and in the process of closing is going to be key to help driving and keeping that value. Lastly, this kind of goes into when you're in the process of going to market, never change how you run your business. One of the biggest drivers to lose value is all of a sudden deciding I'm going to pinch a penny here, or I'm not going to do this that I normally do, because strategic buyers who are in your industry know, private equity buyers or institutional investors, they're smart enough, they've been doing it long enough to know if the trend in repairs and maintenance on equipment all of a sudden starts going down, there's deferred maintenance in there. And me as the new owner, I don't want to, pay what I'm going to pay you, but then also have to turn around and start maintaining the equipment that you decided not to maintain. Those are just some, examples of key data, but 3 points that we see typically on how helping maximize value, but also maintaining the value through the sales process.
Yeah, and from our side, it's all about minimizing risk when going to market. Nobody likes a surprise. Even if you've got stellar financials, a quality of earnings allows us to see some things from the buyer's standpoint that are going to be essential. The buyer's going to do a Q of E during diligence no matter what. So if you are able to get one done a year ahead of time, spot some of the gaps, fill some of those gaps, but like with Mark saying, not anything out of the ordinary, but some actual essential shifts within the way that you're operating the company, that can make a difference. And you're not only able to go to market with a very strong perception of exactly where you are, but we're able to represent you in a strong way as well. And when Mark, you mentioned that I was talking to a client earlier today who had some pretty great ideas for his company and said, but I don't want to do it because I'm thinking about selling. So I think I'm going to do X, Y, and Z instead. And that was the exact advice that we gave. Continue to run your company as if you're not selling it. Take the same steps. If you've got a great vision, let's continue to implement that vision. And a quality of earnings sometimes allow us to see what direction that vision should be going if you're getting that done far enough ahead of time.
That's really helpful. Thanks so much, Paul. So Larry, I want to know, we've talked quite a bit about getting a management team in place. Can you tell us why developing an appropriate management team over the years is so important, and give us some advice on that?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, if you're trying to build value within your business, if you are, running every position, if you are the president, you're doing the HR work and hiring, you're doing all the sales work, you or your wife's doing all of the accounting work, and you're looking to retire, what value is that going to bring to any potential purchaser or whomever is taking over that business? So what you want to do over the years is develop a strong management team that can run this thing without you. It's not that, if you were completely expendable, you shouldn't be there to begin with. But in most transitions, your people normally have a 2-year period in which to transition everything over, or that's generally what I've seen, 2 years or less. And so what you need is a strong management team that's running all of those functions to make your business run as smoothly as possible. And so you need to constantly be looking for competent people to manage that. And your job's kind of as the overseer. Well, then when you sell the business to another overseer, they can come in and know that they have something that will continue to make money for them as the transition occurs. So, from my experience, those businesses where the owner is doing everything, they don't sell, there's no interest. The only exception I've seen is if you are the one that's ruining the profit in the market that they're operating in, and they just want to get you out of business. But in 9 out of 10 situations, that's going to have no value there. Your business is not a machine that's making money. It is simply you. And so you don't have anything to sell if it's just you, or just you and your immediate family who probably want to retire too, or get out of business also. So I think that competent, looking for the best and the brightest in your business that are doing their jobs well and having those functions identified and operating is just key to building value within your business.
Yeah, that's really valuable information. Thanks so much, Larry. Paul and Mark, let's talk about real estate. How is that usually handled in the sale of a business?
And when it comes to real estate, I'll cover from one side, and Mark can speak from his side as well. When it comes to that, down to the value of the business, usually it's totally separate. So we will do a market assessment. It's only going to include the business itself. So if you get an appraisal, you can look at your real estate. And then there's a couple of options. There's some buyers that want to buy everything, and some that are not interested in the real estate at all. And so the owner continues to lease that property to the new owner, and there's no problems with that whatsoever. We've also seen it when neither party actually wants to own the property. And so a third party will come in, purchase the property, and then do a lease back in order to do that. So the owner really has a lot of options unless the property is actually attached to the business itself. But a lot of the businesses that we sell, it's not. It could be in a strip mall if it's a doctor's office. They may end up owning the entire complex and wanting it to be sold completely separately. And we've known a lot of owners to sell their property first, maybe years out. I talked to a client earlier this week who 5 years ago had completely sold the property piece, was leasing it back from the buyer, and now was ready to sell the business. So there are a lot of options. Mark?
Yeah, not too much to add, Paul. You kind of touched on it a little bit, but if that business is, or if that real estate is key to the business, how you structure it, how you set it up, maybe proactively decide to carve out the real estate and put it into its own separate entity, so that way you do have options, are key. The one thing to know is think of a manufacturing company where your machines are in your building, it's a piece of property. Well, without that building, without that property, that your business can't function, right? It's hard to move equipment, especially if you're talking big conveyor belts or presses or whatever the equipment is. It's expensive to move and hard to move. And so being flexible, giving yourself flexibility by maybe doing some structuring and getting that real estate into a separate entity or something of that nature gives you more options when it comes to a potential transaction. And I hate this keywords, but it's the one. It always depends.
That's the truth for sure. So Joel, can you tell us what an earnout is and how does that work for business owners? I get this question a lot.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a really important question too, because it can really make a difference in the overall value of a company. So I think when business owners think about selling their company, the ideal dream scenario might be all of my money in cash at closing, zero post-closing risk, and I get to go travel or do whatever I want to do. That would be really, really awesome. Sometimes it works that way. More often than not, there's a link to the business for the seller going forward. Whether that's an ongoing role in the company, hey, we want you to stay for 2 to 3 years to help with a longer term transition. There may be an equity rollover in which the seller retains a part of the ownership in the company, or to take part in the future sale of the company to benefit again when the company is sold at some point in the future. There could be a seller note in which the seller actually finances part of the deal. There's a promissory note. It's not contingent on anything other than just the company remaining solvent. An earnout is another element of value that usually is contingent upon some future event. It may be tied to a revenue target or a profit or earnings target. And, a lot of times for our clients, we like to see the earnout represent sort of the stretch piece on value. You never say never. We're not in favor of the buyer that's not really well enough funded to do a deal that might come to the table and offer a great number, but then say, hey, 50% of that's in an earnout and 30% of that's in a seller note. That may not be the best thing for the client, right? Sometimes what we see is, hey, from the buyer's perspective, we can stretch some on that value, but we're going to need you to hit some future targets to actually achieve that full value. So think of a scenario in which you've got a company that's worth $20 million and a buyer comes in and says, hey, we can give you as much as 25 million, but that last 5 is going to depend on the next 3 years revenue and profitability or some other growth metrics. Lots of legal language that goes into defining an earnout. You have to define, if it's tied to EBITDA earnings, that has to be really carefully defined in the purchase agreement. You have to be really careful in defining the metrics. So it complicates the deal a little bit. But if it represents additional value to the seller in those cases, we can say, hey, this earnout really isn't that bad of a thing. It gives you a chance to create some added value to the transactions.
Right. Paul, can you explain the need to have a long-term employment agreement in place?
And when it comes to you as the owner, or it comes to your key employees, it can be fairly important, whether that's done right before the purchase or even if you've got that in place for many years. But as we've been talking about the management team, they want to hold on to talent. The acquirer, if things are going well, they want to keep those key people in place. If you've run your company exceptionally well, that's why they want to keep you on for 2 years or maybe a little bit more if needed. And that makes a difference because it's based again in risk and in security. Sometimes that play may come along into an equity play so that there is the possibility of the key players earning some equity position over time, and that keeps them there as well. Because most of these groups are not simply buying a company to own a company. They're thinking about growth. They're thinking about their investors. A few years ago, we had a company that we took to market that was a great private equity play. It was like 70% was cashed out. 30% remain in the company. There was a setup for the employees, at least the key employees, to be able to earn equity over time. And that's exactly what happened. So they were able within 5 years to vet that and to qualify for that. And they had ownership. And then when that second bite of the apple came in year 7, there was a payout to everybody along the lines. Then something that's interesting, not always typical, but it does happen. The owner and that second bite, his 30% was worth more than his original 70% when he cashed out. So some of those types of plays, if your aggressive mindset of growth are a possibility, and so that employment agreement really ends up being important. Joel, what are some other aspects that buyers really want to be able to pull into the equation with employees when it comes to a purchase?
Well, I think we've touched on this. Larry touched on this really well early, that the business can't be just all you as the owner. So that second tier of management is really important. And you may not have granted them equity. They may not be under an employment agreement with you, but depending on the type of acquirer that comes to the table, they could really look to that non-owner key employee to say, hey, how do we secure that person to make sure, one, after you transition out, we need that person or these key people still there, or two, the catastrophe scenario. What if something happens to you? What if you have a health crisis? Who's going to be here to help us run this company? Have to keep in mind that this is especially true with private equity and family office and acquirers. They're investing other people's money, and so they are going to be risk averse. A large corporate acquirer may have the bench strength to fill a gap if you had a health crisis, or if you were for some reason unable to fulfill that period, that transitional period. But private equity and family office acquirers, they're usually not in your exact business. They're relying on you and your management team to run it. So depending on the type of acquirer, it can be an even more sensitive issue with those second and third tier management level employees.
That's really helpful information, Joel. Thank you. And I want to remind our participants, if you have questions that you'd like for us to answer, just go to the Q&A box and you can put those in and we'll answer those a little bit later. So let's see, Larry and Mark, what's different if you plan to transfer your business to the next generation rather than planning to sell?
Well, I'll go first since Mark's not unmuted, but the biggest thing that I've seen is it depends on the intention of the owner, because through the years I've dealt with this transition in many different ways. And some owners, think that being a good parent is giving the business away and that they've made plenty of money. They have all that they need. They want to just give it to their kids. And so if you have that scenario, really you need to look at the estate and gift tax implications of that. How are you going to transfer? What are your intentions? Sometimes they have the erroneous assumption that you can just take all the cash out of the business and they can take that home, which then you've completely depleted the working capital of the business, which is going to affect its ability to continue as a going concern. So, that's not really an option. So you need to, once again, you need to plan ahead and think of, because of estate or gift taxing, you may have to transition over a period of time. You also need time to bring the next generation up to speed on what you're doing if they're not completely familiar with it, but train them in all the aspects of the business that they need to know about. I've had other clients who are very adamant that they don't want to transfer to the next generation with gifts, that they believe that hard work has paid off. It paid off for them. And with that situation, particularly in the construction industry that I deal in most, we've done some old company, new company setups where, the owner made the next generation put up money and form a new company that was bonding and the banking and all could feed off of both companies as a joint entity until it could stand on its own. But I think, once again, it's kind of like writing your will, knowing your intentions. If you have multiple children or family members or whatever, and you feel like, if I'm doing this for one, what are you going to do for the other? There's a lot of different implications that come into play when you transfer to a next generation, particularly with your children. Just getting on the same page with your spouse, if you have one, and knowing and planning for the timing of it all, alerting your players outside the business that are your partners, your bankers, your insurance agents, all those, what you're doing and how you're going to do it so that you have a good plan that is effective in taking advantage of all that you can do to minimize taxes, to keep the business strong for the next generation, and to be able to accomplish your own personal goals, whatever they may be. Mark, what would you add?
Yeah, I think you touched on all the good points, Larry. You know, the one, I'm a little more cold-hearted. I would say that even in a family transaction or generational transaction, you can treat it as an arm's length transaction, and that's not bad. Everyone's goals, family philosophy are different, and so you know, the key thing is to try to keep emotion out of everything when it comes into a transaction, especially when you're dealing with family. But again, I'm a little bit old school, and I say treat it as an arm's length transaction and then adjust accordingly.
Well, you all have given a lot of great information today, and I think our attendees can see how much we work as a team on these transactions, on gaining information from each other, just constantly trying to give you the most value as a CRI client. So I have a wrap-up question, and I want to give each one of you 2 or 3 minutes to let us know what are the most important things our attendees need to be doing or to have in place to be prepared for a business exit. Mark?
Sure. Thanks, Christine. Well, appreciate everyone joining this afternoon. You know, from my standpoint, obviously being in the industry, dealing with transactions on a day in, day out basis, and executing on transactions myself, purchasing and also exiting companies. The one piece that I've learned is to be surrounded by the right advisors. You know, everyone says they have an attorney, and they're excited to use their attorney when they're going into a transaction, but not every attorney is versed in actual transactions. And as Joel, Paul, Larry, we've all talked about the different elements of a transaction. It's very important to surround yourself with people that have experience and that can protect you as the business owner and the selling investor, the selling equity holder to protect you. Same thing when it comes to investment banks or investment banker, when it comes to diligence, tax advisor. Surround yourself with the people that actually have deal and transaction experience, because it will save you in the long run a lot of heartache and also probably value.
Paul?
All right. You know, when you mentioned heartache, that really brought something to mind. Besides just drivers of value in general, we typically look at 7 drivers, and we're happy to send you a resource on that after this webinar that we can walk through and step through those value centers. But when you mentioned that about saving yourself a lot of heartbreak, often owners are caught off guard at just how difficult a sale is. That when you are selling something that you've spent your life building, you've poured your life into, and it can get extremely personal. It can be extremely difficult. A few years ago, we sold a company with some gentlemen who were, we would say, very strong individuals. And when Joel let them know, hey, this is your grandfather's company, it's going to be a little bit emotional, it's going to be harder than you think, they were like, nope, this isn't going to affect me. This is a business deal. And one morning they called and said, okay, you're right. This is tough. This is hard. It was very emotional. It ended up going to an incredible buyer, a great synergy, a lot of great fit, but preparing yourself emotionally and mentally to go through this process that on the shortest end will be 3 months. Most likely it's going to take about a year of time. The great thing is, if you've got the right team, like Mark is talking about, it's just so much easier than trying to do that yourself. Joel?
Yeah, I would say start early thinking about what you really want out of the transaction. Now, we're really practical, economically focused and driven professionals, but there's so much more to a transaction than just the economics. There's certainly nothing wrong with deciding to sell your company and having your primary goal be achieving highest possible valuation, highest possible cash at closing. Those are worthy goals, and those are goals that we pursue on behalf of our clients every day. But more often than not, we find sellers who also think about, I have a son or a daughter in this business and they're not ready to take it over. They're not ready to buy it, but this is their future. This is their career as well. We were talking with a client just the other day who's got about 250 employees, and he referred to the 250 families that depend on him for their livelihood. And so, yes, think through economics. Yes, think through the terms and conditions that will or won't be okay with you, but also think through what else do I want outside of economics? What does this need to look and feel like moving forward? It makes a difference in when we understand that, we can target buyers a little bit differently. We can tell you, hey, this is a flashy number, but here's their track record post close, and then there may be some things there you don't like. Then again, the difference in value may be worth it. You may be able to take care of those employees personally by taking the absolute highest bid. So I would say, heading into this preparation process, think through very carefully what you want the outcome to look and feel like, in addition to just the numbers.
Larry?
Christine, what I would say is, and I've stressed this every time, but the time, you need, if you don't have a succession plan that you've already implemented as of today or yesterday, or hopefully from the get-go, you need to do it now, because it takes time to put a management team in place. I mean, to find the best people that are in sales and HR and accounting and project management and all those things, that takes time to build that team. Takes time to diversify your customer base and try to build a lot of annuity business, which is extremely important when you're looking to sell. Because if you have clients that are coming back and someone can look at you and see that you have sales to these clients that are so much year after year after year, that adds a lot of value. It takes time to look and make sure that, I had a client that was thinking of doing a sale, and looking at it, they realized that they were going to lose 40% because of their tax entity type. So looking at where you have time, and there's a look back period. If they were, in this particular case, they were a C corporation. So had they been an S corporation, they would have had, a 20% tax savings. But there's a look back period the IRS does. So, they needed to have thought about that 5 years ago and adopted that to change, anticipating a sale of that business. If you have the next generation, you need time to train the next generation in all that they need to do for you to see how you manage that business successfully. So I think there's so many things, and if I see one thing in practice, all too often it's people not taking the time to sit down and thinking about it early enough, or thinking about it at all, because it's one of those things that, although it's highly important, it's not urgent. It's not something that has to be done. And so people choose to put it off. And oftentimes they wait too long, where they could, if they had just started so much earlier, either the value would have been so much more, or they wouldn't be in a situation where, they're looking to where they're 67 years old and are just tired of working, but the only way they're going to get value out of their business is to liquidate it, which is, just never going to be your best value. And so when something represents so much of your assets and your personal net worth, and something that you work so hard for, and I mean, if you started this business, a lot of times people feel about it like a child. You want to see it go on. And so by thinking ahead as soon as possible and thinking about all the things you need to, and constantly tweaking that plan, you're going to have such a better outcome, whatever the situation ends up being, whether it is to your children, whether it is to another person, where your goals and your dreams for your business will actually be able to be a reality, where at the same time giving you and your family the worth that you put into that. So I think it's just very important to start the process as soon as humanly possible.
I want to add in just a note to that real quick. One of the great starting places is whether it's a Q of E or market assessment to figure out what that value is so that this long-term planning that Larry's talking about, it's so much easier when you begin with your number and you begin growing from there instead of growing into a question mark. So we'd encourage that as well.
Absolutely. And one thing that I want to add is if you're actively being pursued by a strategic buyer or private equity, like Paul said, knowing your value, but also reaching out to your advisors, your CPA, your attorneys, and really getting a team around you before you make a deal is so important because you need the advice of the professionals that do this day in and day out. So that's really important. And I really appreciate the professionals that we've had on our webinar today. And I just want to let you know the best time to plan for after the sale is actually before the sale. So please make sure to join us for the second part of our webinar on post-sale considerations on January 31st, where we will have 2 more of CRI's portfolio companies, Level 4 Financial Advisors and the Preferred Legacy Trust National Bank, joining us, as well as our CRI CPA partner, Tom Carmichael, to discuss the financial impact that a sale will have on your business and you personally, and the options that you have. So all of the presenters' contact information is going to be following. So you can reach out to anyone that you would like to speak with further. As I said, when we have our Q&A at the bottom, we will reach out to you and answer those questions personally. And again, please take the time to jot down the email of any of the presenters that you'd like to discuss your business with further. And we appreciate you joining us today. And please sign up to join us on January 31st. Thanks, everyone.